We put that information into a structure that you're much likely to remember for years and years to come. Hi there, Kelsey Toner here, the founder of Guest Focused Tour Business Coaching, where every day myself and our team of tour and activity business coaches are helping you build a thriving, profitable tour business. In this series, we're going to be looking at how to design a tour or activity or experience that is truly unforgettable. We're going to be sharing practical frameworks and tips, and as always, best practices from some of the most successful tours and activities on the planet. Today, we're exploring how to transform your fact-heavy or narrative-dense tours into much more memorable experiences through the power of storytelling. In today's world, information is everywhere. With smartphones, internet, and AI, facts are at everyone's fingertips. We are constantly overwhelmed with information. I often have this image of a tour leader just backing up, a truckload of facts and then just dumping it all over their guests for 2 to 3 hours or more. This is not how we want to design our tours. Where we provide this extraordinary value is delivering that information in a compelling, impactful way. We're the curators. We are deciding what to share and how to share it, and to create an experience out of that information. And that is exactly what storytelling does. Here's why stories matter. They're not just memorable for your guests, but they're also easier for your guides and experience hosts to deliver as well. When your content is primarily story-based rather than fact-based, your tour will be more memorable. Why is that important? More memorable tours mean more rave reviews from your guests, more word-of-mouth referrals as they remember that tour, activity, or experience for longer, deeper emotional connections with your brand, with your company, with your team, more leads, more sales, and more profit. So let's do a quick breakdown of how stories work. Every great story needs 3 essential elements. The first is character. Who is this story about? The second is conflict. What challenge, desire, or tension are they ultimately experiencing? And note that this conflict or tension, it has to happen to that main character. And thirdly, a plot. Things need to happen, right? We need to know what ultimately happens. How is that conflict or tension ultimately resolved? Character, conflict, plot. The power of storytelling lies in just how universal the structure is. Across every culture, every time period, from ancient myths to modern movies, stories follow similar patterns. This structure was identified by Gustav Freytag, a man who, in addition to having a magnificent mustache, fundamentally shaped how we understand storytelling. You've likely heard these 5 key stages of a story or narrative arc before. The first being the exposition, where we're setting the scene, introducing the character, conflict, or tension. The rising action, where we build that tension. The climax, or the turning point, where that tension is resolved. And the falling action is where we see the impact of what has happened. And the denouement is that final resolution. So the beauty of this story structure is its flexibility. These elements and this arc needs to be present whether you're telling a 1-minute story about a local landmark, or maybe a longer 10 or 15-minute narration about a neighborhood, or if you want to have a story arc that is resolved at the end of your tour. All of these elements need to be present. Before we dive into transforming facts into stories, here's another practical tip. Every story has one big question at its heart. This big question is ultimately what hooks the attention of the audience, of your guests. They need to be wondering about something that is not answered or resolved until the climax of the story, very near the end. And so this gives us a really practical test, and I love calling it the story stop test. Essentially, if you want to find out if you've got a good story arc going, if what you are doing is actually a story with a friend, a colleague, or maybe in front of some of your guests, start telling your story, and then about halfway through, just stop and see what happens. If the response is, well, hey, what happened? Or, hey, how did that resolve? Then there's a good chance that you've got a story. But if there's no questions, everyone's kind of like, okay. It's a good chance you weren't actually using that story structure. It's a great test. So let's say you're working on one of your existing tours, or you're designing a new tour, and you want to transform some of these facts into stories. Here's a step-by-step process on how you can do that. So here's a very straightforward fact. The Eiffel Tower was built in 1887. This is clearly not a story. There's no character, there's no conflict, and there's no plot. Nothing's happened, no way. So every fact has a constellation of possible characters around it, i.e. there are human beings whose lives were impacted by or connected to that fact. Your job is to find them and ultimately tell their stories. Okay, let's say we found a human being. The Eiffel Tower was built in 1887 by Gustav Eiffel. Hooray, but is this a story? Well, no way, there's still no tension, there's still no conflict, and there's not a lot of stuff happening. So digging deeper into the life of Gustave Eiffel, we can find some conflict and some tension. In the 1880s, a man named Gustave became obsessed with building the tallest man-made structure on Earth. Hey, now we're storytelling. Notice how this structure instantly creates tension. We've got a man with an ambitious dream. This naturally leads to our big question. Your guests should be wondering, or probably curious, hey, well, did Gustave actually achieve something that no one else had done before? Did he actually succeed in building the tallest man-made structure? So now, as we continue to add in some more facts about some of the challenges associated with building the Eiffel Tower, we're now contributing to the story of Gustave Eiffel. For example, we might share that the tallest structure at the time is only half his proposed height for this new tower. He had less than 2 years to complete it. The grant he received only covered 1/6 of the cost. The soil was soft and faced constant flooding in Paris. The elevator system absolutely terrified Gustave more than anything else and required all kinds of untested innovations. Notice that each of these challenges adds to the tension and keeps your audience invested in the answer to that big question. And so as we work our way towards the climax and the end of this story, we might say something like, well, hey, through criticism and ridicule and a fatality and a worker strike and even a lawsuit, Gustave Eiffel stuck to his ambitious dream. And in 1887, Gustave Eiffel not only succeeded in building the tallest man-made structure on Earth, but also finished on time and came in 6% under his $1.6 million budget. Notice it is only here at the end when we finally answer that big question. Hey, was Gustave Eiffel ultimately successful? Now, we could have shared these facts, this information about the Eiffel Tower in lots of different ways. But by using this story structure, what we did is we shared that information in a way that was engaging. We shared it in a way that was a journey. We put that information into a structure that you're much likely to remember for years and years to come. As you're researching or hunting for stories to include on your tour, remember the most powerful stories tap into universal human experiences, like the desire to achieve a dream, overcoming difficulties or challenges, love and loss, standing up for what's right, or the drive to create something lasting. Instead of listing winemaking steps, tell the story of a local vintner's first failed batch and how it led to their signature methodology. Rather than just stating architectural facts, share the tale of an eccentric architect who insisted on building against everyone's advice. Don't just point out a market stall, but tell how the current owner's grandfather started the business with just one basket of oranges during hard times. So creating, crafting, or finding these stories to include in the content of our tour is essential. And of course, storytelling is a skill we can continue to master. So in the interest of keeping things practical, here are some common mistakes to avoid when storytelling on tour. Firstly, forgetting to establish the big question early. We need you to introduce your character and the conflict or desire or tension as quickly as possible, like in the first 1 or 2 sentences. Too many people give a lot of context or start describing settings and characters before we have the actual tension. Establish that big question right away. 2, including too many details that don't serve the story. Describing your character, the time period, their circumstances, yes, all of that's important, but beware of stuffing your stories with too many irrelevant details. Thirdly, rushing to the resolution without building tension. The best stories have stakes and consequences that grow, and resolving the tension too quickly, i.e. answering that big question too soon, will leave your stories feeling flat and unsatisfying to your guests. Finally, with our stories, we never want to leave our audience wondering, so what? A great tour will link your stories to something concrete for your guests, connecting the past to the present, the history to what your guests can see, touch, or experience right now. So whether you want to design a tour with one overarching story, where maybe you answer that key question at the end of your tour, or you simply want to replace a lot of the facts and information on your tour with stories, keep this in mind. Your job as a tour activity or experience designer is to take that information and to transform it into an experience, into a journey. And that's exactly what stories do. Want to access more of our resources on storytelling, including a 12-hour program with workbooks, tools, resources, templates, and real-world examples to help your team get better at storytelling? Well, book a call with one of our coaches down below. It's a free 45-minute strategy call, and we'd love to share some of these tools to help you or your team create, craft, and tell better stories on tour. If you found this video useful, it would mean the world to us if you would share it with a friend or colleague or pass it along to some of your tour leaders. Additionally, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. What is your best storytelling tip? Any practical advice that has really served you well over your years of experience? Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you in the next video.